Welcome back to the table. As always, I'm your host, Chad Tafts. Before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out to Alpha Supps. As I've been preparing to get back into Army shape, I partnered with them as an ambassador. If you're working on your own fitness goals, you'll find my link in the description. Now, let's pull up the chair. Last week, we talked about the man in the mirror, the man all look at every single day, a man we either like or a man we don't. But more importantly, we talked about looking beyond our physical appearance and taking an honest look at our character, because that's the reflection that really matters. This week, we're going to talk about something that's inside every one of us, our pride. More specifically, the price of our pride. Because pride always costs us something. Sometimes it costs us relationships because we refuse to admit when we're wrong. Sometimes it costs us opportunities because our pride convinces us that we deserve something we may never have earned. Sometimes it costs us promotions at work because instead of asking, how can I improve? We spend our time convincing ourselves that someone else robbed us of what we deserved. And sometimes the biggest thing our pride cost us is our growth. Because as long as pride keeps telling us we are already good enough, we'll never become the man we're capable or destined to be. So today, let's talk about the price of pride. Now, come on in, get comfortable, and pull up a chair. Last episode, we talked a lot about masks. The masks we wear, the version of ourselves that we show the rest of the world, the ways we try to hide who we really are. And I think pride is one of the biggest masks we wear. Because nobody wakes up in the morning, looks in the mirror, and says, you know what? I'm a prideful person. That's not how pride works. It doesn't introduce itself, it doesn't announce its presence, it doesn't wave a flag and tell everyone it's there. Instead, it hides. It disguises itself. It convinces us that it's something else. Now, before we go any further, I want to make something clear. There are different kinds of pride. There's the kind of pride you feel when your child accomplishes something that they've worked really hard for. When they bring home a good report card, when they score their first touchdown, when they stand up for someone who's being picked on. You're proud of them. That's healthy. The same goes for being proud of your spouse, proud of your family, proud of your friends, proud of the life that you've worked hard to build. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not the kind of pride we're talking about today. Today, we're talking about the kind of pride that quietly changes the way we think, that kind that whispers in our ear, the kind that convinces us that we're always right, that everyone else just doesn't understand, that we're justified, that we don't need to change. That kind of pride is dangerous because it rarely sounds dangerous. It disguises itself as self respect. I'm just standing my ground. It disguises itself as fairness. Oh, they owe me an apology. It disguises itself as strength. I'm not going to let anyone walk all over me. It disguises itself as confidence. I know what I'm doing. And before long, we stop asking questions. We stop listening. We stop learning. Because somewhere along the way, our pride convinced us that we already have all the answers. Have you ever been in an argument, not because you were trying to understand the other person, but just because we were trying to win? I know I have. There have been moments in my life where I wasn't listening to what someone was saying. I was just waiting for my turn to talk, waiting for my chance to prove why I was right. That's pride. Not because I necessarily believed in what I was saying, but because I cared more about being right than understanding the person that's sitting across from me. Pride has a way of turning conversations into competitions. Every disagreement becomes something to win. Every criticism becomes a personal attack. Every piece of advice feels like an insult. And eventually, we become so busy defending ourselves that we stop growing. I think that's why pride is so dangerous. It doesn't just affect our relationships, it affects our ability to become better men. Because if I can't admit I'm wrong, then I can't learn. If I can't admit I made a mistake, then I can't improve. If I think I already know everything, why would I seek wisdom from someone else? Pride builds walls between husbands and wives, parents and children, friends, coworkers, even between us, ourselves, and the men we're trying to become. The hardest thing about pride is that while we're busy protecting our ego, we often end up damaging the very things we're trying to protect. Our relationships, our reputation, our peace, our future. That's why pride wears a mask. Because if it showed us the damage it was causing from the very beginning, most of us would take it off immediately. But instead, it convinces us that it's helping us, when in reality, it's quietly costing us more than we ever realize. One thing I've noticed is that confidence and pride get confused with each other all the time. People think they're the same. They're not. In fact, I think they're almost opposites. Confidence says, I know my worth. Pride says, I'm worth more than everyone else. Confidence says, I've come a long way. Pride says, I don't have anywhere else left to go. Confidence says, I can still learn. Pride says, I already know all that. That's the difference. Confidence is secure, pride is insecure. That may sound backwards because when you look at someone who's prideful, they're usually confident. They walk into a room like they own it. They've got an answer for everything. They don't ask questions. They don't second guess themselves. At least that's what they want you to think. But underneath all of that, a lot of pride comes from insecurity because pride constantly feels like it has something to prove. Think about it. Have you ever met someone who always had to be the smartest in the room? No matter what the conversation was, they had an answer. If you shared a story, they had a better one. If you accomplished something, they accomplished something bigger. It's almost like everything became a competition to them. I've met people like that. Maybe you have too. Maybe you've been that person. The funny thing is, the most confident people I've ever met usually aren't the loudest. They're comfortable saying, I don't know. Can you teach me? I've never thought about it that way. Because confident people aren't afraid to learn. They don't see learning as weakness, they see it as growth. Pride sees learning differently. Pride says, if I ask a question, people might think I don't know what I'm doing. So instead, it pretends. It acts like it already has all the answers, and that's dangerous. Because the moment you think you've learned everything, you stop growing. I don't care if you're 20 years old or if you're 80 years old. Every single one of us has something to learn. Every one of us. I've learned things from people younger than me. I've learned things from people older than me. I've learned things from my kids. I've learned things from complete strangers because wisdom doesn't care how old you are. It doesn't care what your job title is. It doesn't care how much money you make. If you're willing to listen, you'll probably learn something. Another difference between confidence and pride is who you're trying to impress. Confident people don't spend their lives trying to prove themselves to everyone else. They're comfortable with who they are. They don't need constant validation. They don't need to win every argument. They don't need to remind everyone how successful they are. Pride does. Pride needs recognition. Pride needs attention. Pride needs to win. And when it doesn't, it gets defensive. One thing I've realized is that confidence builds other people up. Pride competes with them. A confident leader wants the people around him to succeed. A prideful leader feels threatened when someone else succeeds. A confident husband celebrates his wife's accomplishments. A prideful husband feels like he has to outshine them. A confident father teaches his children. A prideful father thinks he already has nothing left to learn from them. That's a huge difference. Confidence creates influence. Pride creates distance. And here's where I think we have to be careful. Every single one of us has a little bit of both. I know I do. There are moments where I've been confident, and there are moments where my pride has gotten in my way. The goal isn't to completely eliminate confidence, it's to make sure our confidence never turns into pride. Because confidence allows you to grow. Pride convinces you you've already arrived. There's something funny about pride. It always sends a bill. The problem is, it doesn't usually send it right away. Sometimes it takes weeks, months, even years. And by the time that bill arrives, we've forgotten what caused it. Pride doesn't just affect you in the moment, it affects you, your relationships, your career, the way you parent, the way you lead, the way you grow. It reaches into every area of your life. Let's start with relationships. I think this is where pride does the most damage. Have you ever been in an argument where somewhere in the middle you realized you were wrong? You knew it, you felt it, but instead of admitting it, you doubled down. You kept arguing. You kept defending yourself, not because you believed what you were saying anymore, but because your pride wouldn't let you lose. I've done that. And looking back, I've asked myself, what was I trying to win? Because if you're trying to win, even if you win the argument, you might lose the relationship. Real pride sounds like this: I'd rather be right than happy. I'd rather prove my point than make peace. I'd rather protect my ego than protect the relationship. And that's an expensive price to pay. Pride doesn't stop at home, it follows you to work. Maybe you've received constructive criticism before. Maybe your boss sat you down and tried to help you improve. Did you listen? Or did you immediately start thinking of reasons why they were wrong? Pride has a way of rejecting feedback because it assumes feedback is an attack. But sometimes the people correcting us are the people trying to help us become better. One of the fastest ways to stop growing at work is believing you have nothing left to learn. I've seen people miss opportunities, not because they weren't talented, but because they weren't teachable. Their pride convinced them that they were already good enough. Then there's parenting. And I think this is one area where pride quietly sneaks in. How many parents refuse to apologize to their own children? Why? Because they think being the parent means never admitting the wrong. I don't believe that. I think one of the greatest lessons that we can teach our children is what accountability looks like. Imagine your child hearing these words: I was wrong. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have reacted that way. Do you know what that teaches? It teaches humility. It teaches responsibility. It teaches that even adults make mistakes and that making a mistake doesn't make you weak. Refusing to admit one does. And finally, pride affects our personal growth because our growth begins the moment we admit, I still have work to do. The man who thinks he's arrived stops moving. The man who believes he knows everything stops learning. The man who refuses correction stops improving. That's the cost of pride. It doesn't just keep other people at a distance. Eventually, it keeps you from becoming the man you were meant to be. So let me ask you something. Where has pride been sending you a bill? Was it a relationship? A missed opportunity? A friendship that faded away? A promotion you didn't get? Or maybe the greatest cost has been becoming comfortable instead of becoming better? Oh, hush. I think one of the hardest sentences a man can say is three simple words: I was wrong. Not because they're difficult to say, but because they're difficult to believe. Somewhere along the way, a lot of us started believing that admitting we're wrong somehow makes us weak. That if we apologize, we've lost. That if we own our mistakes, people won't people won't respect us anymore. I've never understood that because the older I've gotten, the more I realize the exact opposite is true. Think about the people you respect the most: the best leaders you've ever worked for, the best coaches, the best fathers, the best husbands. Have they never made mistakes? Of course they have. They're human. The difference is when they make a mistake, they own it. They don't spend 30 minutes explaining why it wasn't really their fault. They don't point fingers. They don't make excuses. They don't say, I'm sorry, but that word, but, has ruined a lot of apologies. I'm sorry, but you, blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, but if you hadn't, blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, but you made me. That's not an apology. That's an excuse wearing an apology as a mask. A real apology is simple: I was wrong. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have reacted that way. No explanation, no defense, no shifting the blame, just ownership. And I'll be honest with I've been struggling with that. There have been times where I knew I needed to apologize. I knew I was wrong, but my pride kept saying, wait for them to apologize first. They owe you. The problem is, while you're waiting for someone else to make that first move, that relationship keeps drifting further apart. Sometimes one phone call could change everything. One conversation, one apology, one moment of humility, but pride keeps us silent. One thing I've realized is this: an apology doesn't erase what happened, It doesn't automatically fix the relationship. It doesn't guarantee forgiveness, but it does something important. It tells the other person, I value this relationship more than I value my ego. And that's powerful, especially as fathers. Our kids don't need parents who never make mistakes. They need parents who show them what accountability looks like. Imagine your child hearing you say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have yelled, or I was wrong. Do you know what that teaches? It teaches that humility. It teaches that responsibility. It teaches that strong people admit when they mess up. That's a lesson they'll carry for the rest of their lives. Real strength isn't pretending you're perfect. Real strength is admitting when you're not. Now it's time for our roundtable reflection. Wherever you are right now, driving, working, sitting at home, I want you to think about a few questions. Don't answer them out loud, just answer them honestly. When was the last time your pride got in the way? Maybe it was an argument. Maybe it was a conversation that never happened. Maybe it was something you should have admitted, but didn't. Who do you still need to apologize to? Is it your spouse, your parents, a friend, your child, someone you haven't talked to in years? Is there someone who's still waiting for a phone call, an apology, a conversation? Now, let me ask you something else. If they called you today, would your pride answer the phone or would your humility? Because one of those voices builds walls, the other builds bridges. Take a second and really think about that. All right, now let's get back to this conversation. I think humility gets a bad reputation. People hear the word humility, and they think it means thinking less of yourself, being weak, being passive, letting people walk all over you. That's not humility. Humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's thinking about yourself less. There's a difference. Humility doesn't mean you don't have confidence. It means your confidence doesn't have to be the center of every conversation. Think about the strongest leaders you've ever known. The ones people naturally wanted to follow. Were they always the loudest person in the room? Usually not. They listened. They asked questions. They welcomed ideas that weren't their own. They weren't threatened by someone else's success. They celebrated it. The same is true for fathers. The best fathers don't have to pretend that they have every answer. They learn alongside their children. They grow, they adapt, they admit when they get it wrong. The same goes for husbands. The best husbands aren't trying to win every disagreement. They're trying to build the strongest marriage they can. The same goes for friends. The friends who stay in your life the longest usually aren't the ones who always have the best advice. They're the ones who listen, who showed up, who were willing to say, man, I don't know, but I'm here. Humility makes you teachable. And I think that's one of the greatest strengths a man can have. Because the moment you believe you've learned everything, you stop growing. I don't care how old you are. I don't care what your job is. I don't care how much experience you have. There's always something left to learn. Always. One thing I've learned over the years is that some of life's greatest lessons come from unexpected places. Sometimes it's an older mentor. Sometimes it's your spouse. Sometimes it's your kids. Sometimes it's someone younger than you. The question isn't who can teach me. The question is, am I humble enough to learn? Because being wrong today doesn't make you weak. Staying wrong tomorrow might. That's the difference. Humility gives you permission to grow. Pride tells you there's nowhere left to go. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from today's conversation, it's this. Humility isn't the opposite of strength. It's what allows strength to grow. Before we wrap up today's conversation, it's time for this week's challenge. And this week's challenge is simple. I don't want you to try to fix every area of your life this week. I don't want you to make a list of 10 different things that need to change. I want you to find one place where your pride has been getting in the way. Maybe it's a conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's an apology you've refused to make. Maybe it's finally asking for help. Maybe it's admitting that you don't have all the answers. Maybe it's accepting advice instead of rejecting it. Whatever it is, take that first step. Don't wait for the other person to make that first move. Don't wait until next Monday. Don't wait until it feels easier. Take the first step. Not because the other person necessarily deserves it, but because you deserve to become a better man. Because every time you choose humility over pride, you're becoming someone that your family can trust, someone your friends can depend on, someone you can respect when you look in the mirror. And if you're nervous, that's all right. Growth usually starts with an uncomfortable conversation. The question is, are you willing to have one? So, as we close today, I want to leave you with one final thought. Pride has a way of convincing us that it's protecting our ego is more, and that it's more important than protecting our relationship. It tells us to hold our ground, to never admit we're wrong, to wait for someone else to make that first move, to keep score, to win. But when the dust settles, very few people wish they had been more stubborn. Very few people wish they had won one more argument. Very few people look back on their lives and say, I wish I had protected my pride more. Most of us simply wish we had loved better, listened more, forgiven sooner, been quicker to apologize, been slower to judge, and spent more time building bridges instead of walls. So this week, don't let your pride become more valuable than the people in your life. Because at the end of the day, your legacy won't be built by how many arguments you won. It will be built by how well you love the people around you. Thank you for pulling up a chair with me today. If this episode made you think, I'd appreciate it if you'd follow the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. If you know another man who needs to hear this conversation, share it with him. Because sometimes one conversation can change a life. Thanks again for pulling up a chair. I'll see you next time at the Roundtable for Men.